She moved to a place that felt like the ends of the earth, but within those walls she found something no one else had given her: dignity. Can you imagine being so desperate, so alone, that even your own mother slams the door in your face? But this story actually happened in the countryside of Virginia in November of 1938, and what followed changed 2 lives forever. If you are watching this story right now, comment down below where you're watching from, which city, which state, or even which country you're joining us from. I love knowing that these stories from the old days reach so many different places and touch hearts everywhere. Leave your comment. I read every single one with love. Beatrice Miller was 23 years old when the life she knew completely fell apart. It was November 1938, and the biting cold of that late autumn morning seemed less cruel than her own mother's gaze. She stood at the door of the house where she had been born, where she had grown up, where she had embroidered her bridal trousseau stitch by stitch with hands that now trembled, clutching a bundle of clothes. Her 7-month belly weighed her down, not just with the baby she carried, but with the crushing weight of the shame the entire community had heaped upon her shoulders. Her mother, Mrs. Gertrude, stood on the threshold with her arms crossed and a face as hard as stone. "Don't cry anymore, Beatrice," she said, her voice dry. "You made your choice when you lay with that man before the wedding. Now deal with the consequences." Beatrice felt the tears burn in her eyes. "But Mama, he promised," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Julian promised we were going to get married. He said the preacher was already notified, that we were just waiting on the license. I trusted him." Mrs. Gertrude took a step back, as if her daughter's proximity might contaminate her. "You trusted a scoundrel who used you and ran for the hills the moment he heard a baby was coming," she said bitterly. "And now the whole neighborhood is pointing fingers at our family. Your father must be turning in his grave with shame. I cannot have you here, Beatrice. I cannot have a fallen daughter staining the only name I have left." The door closed with a definitive sound that echoed in Beatrice's chest like a gunshot. She stood there for a few seconds that felt like hours, staring at the white-painted wood of the door she had walked through 1,000 times. She could hear her mother crying on the other side, but the tears weren't for her. They were for the shame, the ruined reputation, for what the ladies at the sewing circle would say after Sunday service. Beatrice adjusted the bundle on her shoulder, wiped her tears with the back of her hand, and began to walk down the dirt road of the small village of St. Anthony's Creek. People stepped aside when she passed. Mrs. Mercer, who had been her confirmation sponsor, turned her face away and hurried into her own house. Mr. Oakley, the owner of the general store where the family had bought on credit for decades, lowered his eyes and pretended to be busy stacking flour sacks on the porch. The sensation of being invisible and yet having every eye carved into her back was suffocating. Beatrice quickened her pace, even with her heavy legs and swollen feet squeezed into old boots. She had a plan, if that could even be called a plan. She was going to Aunt Josephine's house, her father's sister, who lived 3 streets over. Her aunt had always been more understanding, sweeter. Maybe she would open the door, maybe she would allow Beatrice to stay at least until the baby was born. It was the only hope left in that moment. She knocked on the door of the yellow house, with her heart hammering against her ribs. Aunt Josephine opened the door, but didn't offer a smile. Her face was pure pity mixed with embarrassment. "Beatrice, honey," she began in a low voice, looking sideways to see if anyone was watching. "You know I love you like my own daughter, but Ansel, your uncle, he says we can't. He says if we take you in, his job at City Hall will be compromised. You understand, don't you? Times are tough. We can't risk his employment right now." Beatrice felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. "But Aunt Jo, I have nowhere to go," she whispered, desperation rising in her voice. "I can work, I can help with sewing, I can do anything. I just need a place until the baby comes." Aunt Josephine shook her head slowly, eyes full of tears she wouldn't let fall. "Check with the church charity," she suggested without conviction. "Or go to Richmond, nobody knows you there. But here, Beatrice, here you won't be able to rebuild anything. What Julian did to you was cruel, but that's life. We reap what we sow." The door closed again. Beatrice stood there feeling something far worse than anger or sadness. It was a feeling of non-existence, of having been erased from the land of the living. She tried 3 more houses: Mrs. Amelia's, her old school teacher; Mr. Bennett's, her mother's former employer; Father Andrew's at the rectory beside the church. All doors closed, some with words of false compassion, others with eloquent silence. When the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in orange and purple, Beatrice was sitting under a mulberry tree on the side of the road leading out of town. She had eaten the last berries she could reach from the low branches, the purple juice staining her fingers and lips. Her stomach hurt. She didn't know if from hunger or the restless creature moving inside her. She opened her bundle and took inventory of everything she owned in the world. 2 patched cotton dresses, a cotton slip, a wool shawl her grandmother had made, a cloth diaper, darned stockings, and a small bottle half full of water. Night was falling fast, and the cold was intensifying. November in Virginia was unforgiving. Beatrice knew she couldn't sleep there on the road, but she didn't know where to go either. She started walking without a destination, following the dirt road that led away from the village toward where people said the large estates and wealthy folks lived. Maybe she could get work at one of those farms. Maybe someone needed a seamstress or a kitchen maid or anything a woman 7 months pregnant could do. She walked for hours. The full moon illuminated the beaten dirt path bordered by pastures on both sides. The cold wind blew, bringing the smell of dry earth and distant smoke from a chimney. Her feet hurt more and more inside the tight boots. She stopped a few times to rest on stones by the roadside, but the cold wouldn't let her stay still for long. She had to keep moving, even without knowing where. That was when she saw the gates. They were enormous, wrought iron with designs of leaves and flowers, supported by 2 brick pillars with gas lamps casting circles of yellow light in the darkness. A bronze plaque read "St. Helena's Estate" in elegant lettering. Through the bars, Beatrice could see a driveway, lined with imperial palms fading into the dark, and far off, barely visible, the silhouette of a large, illuminated house. Something inside her moved. It wasn't exactly hope. It was more a final impulse of survival. She tried to open the gate, but it was locked. She shouted for help, but her voice was lost in the wind. She walked along the barbed wire fence, looking for a gap, some way to get in. She needed to reach that house, needed to ask for help, needed anything that wasn't this cold, empty road. That was when her vision began to darken. Her head felt light, her legs wobbly. Beatrice realized too late that she hadn't eaten anything substantial since the previous morning, that she had walked miles pregnant and dehydrated, that her body was finally paying the price for her despair. She tried to grab the fence, but her fingers wouldn't obey. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the starry sky spinning in a spiral above her, and the last thing she felt was the impact of her body hitting the hard ground. Roderick Vance was returning home after 3 days in Richmond, closing tobacco export deals. It was almost midnight when his driver, Walter, slowed the black Ford as they approached the gates of St. Helena's estate. Roderick was looking out the window without really seeing the landscape, his mind still stuck on numbers, contracts, and international market quotes oscillating dangerously due to the growing tension in Europe. "Sir, there's something on the road," Walter warned with a worried voice. Roderick leaned forward and saw the dark shape fallen almost against the gate. "Could be a drunk," Walter suggested, "or some drifter trying to break in." Roderick was about to agree to just call the caretaker to handle the situation when the headlights illuminated the figure better. "Stop the car," he ordered suddenly. Walter obeyed, and Roderick got out before the engine had even completely stopped. He approached with caution and saw that it wasn't a drunk or a drifter. It was a young woman, pale as wax, with a cloth bundle beside her and a large pregnant belly, very visible even lying on her side. Roderick knelt beside her and placed his fingers on her neck, searching for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. Her skin was ice cold. "Walter, help me here," he called out. "Let's get her inside." The two men carried Beatrice carefully, Roderick supporting her upper body and Walter her legs. They placed her in the back seat, and Roderick got in with her, holding her head in his lap to keep it from bumping during the ride up the bumpy driveway to the main house. Lucille, the housekeeper, woke up to the commotion of male voices and slamming doors. She came down hurriedly, tying her robe, and found her employer carrying an unconscious girl into the living room. "Who is this creature, Mr. Vance?" she asked, alarmed. He didn't answer immediately, just asked her to prepare the guest room, heat some water, and bring blankets. They laid Beatrice on the bed in the downstairs room, the one that had been for guests in the days the estate actually received visitors. Lucille removed the dirty boots, revealing swollen and bruised feet. "This girl is about 7 months along, by the looks of it," she murmured as she covered Beatrice with 2 wool blankets. "And malnourished from the bones I'm feeling." Roderick stood in the doorway observing, not quite knowing what to do. "I'll call Dr. Silver," he decided. Lucille shook her head. "At this hour, the doctor won't come out, sir. Better to wait for her to wake up, see if she's hurt, and then send for him first thing in the morning." Roderick agreed, but couldn't leave the room. He stood there staring at this girl who had appeared out of nowhere at his gate like a ghost in the night. She was beautiful, despite the sickly pallor and worrying thinness. She had dark brown hair caught in a messy bun, long dark lashes against white skin, small hands with slender fingers stained purple with what looked like mulberry juice. Who could she be, he thought. Where did she come from? Why was she alone on the road, pregnant like that? Where was her family, her husband, someone who should be taking care of her? Anger came unexpected and strong. Anger at whoever had abandoned this girl in such a vulnerable condition. Lucille interrupted his thoughts. "You should get some rest, sir," she suggested gently. "I'll stay here and keep an eye on her. If she wakes, I'll call you." Roderick nodded, but he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep. He went up to his room on the second floor, took off his suit jacket and tie, and lay on the bed still fully clothed. The ceiling had water stains he had never fixed, forming abstract shapes he knew by heart from staring at them on sleepless nights. And there were many. 6 years since Helen had died, 6 years since the world had lost its colours, 6 years living on autopilot between the farm and business without feeling anything but a constant void. Helen had died in childbirth. The child, a girl they were going to name Cecily, was stillborn. Roderick still remembered every second of that night of horror. The doctor saying there were complications, that the baby was breech, that they needed to perform an emergency cesarean right there at home because there was no time to get to the city hospital. He remembered Helen's screams, the smell of blood that had taken over the room, the feeling of absolute helplessness as he stood outside listening to the woman he loved suffer, unable to do anything. When the doctor finally came out, the expression on his face said it all. "I'm so sorry," was all he had said. Roderick hadn't cried that night. He hadn't cried at the funeral. He hadn't cried in the months that followed. He had simply shut down, locked everything deep inside his chest, and thrown away the key. He had thrown himself into work, business, expanding the estate. He had sent away servants who tried to comfort him, cut ties with friends who insisted he needed to move on, turned the manor into a mausoleum of frozen memories, and now there was a pregnant girl passed out in the guest room. The irony was not lost on him. Roderick got up from the bed and went to the window. The night outside was bright with the full moon, illuminating the tobacco fields stretching as far as the eye could see. It was a beautiful property, prosperous, the fruit of 3 generations of Vance labor, and completely empty of real life. He went downstairs quietly and returned to the guest room. Lucille had fallen asleep in the armchair next to the bed, her head lolling to the side, breathing heavily. Roderick approached and looked at the girl. She had turned her face to the side, and a lock of hair had escaped her bun, falling over her cheek. She had an expression of pain, even in sleep, brows furrowed and lips tight. That was when she opened her eyes. The movement was sudden, eyes wide with immediate terror at seeing an unknown man beside the bed. Beatrice tried to get up, but her body didn't obey properly. She only managed to prop herself up on her elbows, half sitting. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse with panic. "Who are you? What happened?" Roderick raised his hands in a calming gesture. "You fainted at the gate of my estate," he explained in a low voice, so as not to frighten her further. "I brought you inside. You are safe. You don't need to be afraid." Beatrice looked around the room, trying to understand. She saw elegant furniture, velvet curtains, a crystal chandelier, a Persian rug. None of it made sense. "I need to go," she said, trying to get out of bed. The sudden movement made her head spin, and she brought a hand to her forehead. Roderick moved closer and gently helped her sit better, arranging the pillows behind her back. "You aren't in any condition to go anywhere right now," he said firmly but not harshly. "When was the last time you ate something?" Beatrice tried to remember and realized it had been the morning prior, more than 24 hours ago. The simple mention of food made her stomach turn with hunger. "I'll ask Lucille to fix something," Roderick said, leaving the room before Beatrice could protest. She sat there on the bed, trying to organize her thoughts. She had fainted. A man had found her. She was now in his house, a stranger, wealthy by the looks of the place. The situation was both a relief and a new terror. What would he want in exchange for his help? Men always wanted something in exchange. Roderick returned minutes later, carrying a tray himself, with a bowl of steaming chicken broth, fresh bread with butter, a glass of warm milk, and an apple. He placed the tray on her lap carefully. "Eat slowly," he instructed. "Your stomach must be empty." Beatrice picked up the spoon with trembling hands and began to sip the broth. The hot liquid going down her throat was the most wonderful thing she had felt in days. She ate half the bowl before finally managing to speak. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, looking directly into his eyes for the first time. Roderick held her gaze. They were light brown eyes full of mistrust and disguised despair. "Because you need help," he answered simply. "And because I can help." Beatrice shook her head. "Nobody helps for free," she said bitterly. "Everyone wants something. You'll want something too." Roderick felt a tightness in his chest at the hardness in that young voice. How much suffering must someone so young have gone through to reach this level of disbelief? "I don't want anything from you," he said slowly. "You can stay here until you recover, until the baby is born, until you can get organized. No strings attached." Beatrice felt tears burn her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Why?" she insisted. "Why would a stranger do this?" Roderick stayed silent for a long moment. He didn't know the full answer to that question. Maybe because he himself had lost a baby and a wife. Maybe because he had lived 6 years in a huge house completely alone and empty inside. Maybe because seeing that girl passed out at the gate had awakened something in him that had been dead for a long time. Maybe because it was simply the right thing to do. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he finally answered. "And because this house has been too empty for too long." Beatrice stared at him, looking for the lie, looking for ulterior motives, looking for the trick that certainly existed somewhere. But all she saw was exhaustion and an ancient sadness in the eyes of this man, who must have been about 40, hair starting to grey at the temples, deep lines around his mouth. "What is your name?" Roderick asked. "Beatrice," she whispered. "Beatrice Miller." Roderick extended a formal hand. "Roderick Vance," he introduced himself. "You can stay here, Beatrice, as long as you need." She looked at the extended hand and then at his face. She didn't shake his hand, but nodded almost imperceptibly. It was surrender born of despair, but it was also the first thread of hope she had felt since her mother's door had slammed in her face. She finished the broth in silence, whilst Roderick sat in the armchair where Lucille had fallen asleep. The housekeeper had disappeared discreetly at some point. When Beatrice finished eating, he took the tray, wished her good night, and left her alone in the room. Beatrice sank back into the pillows, feeling her body finally relax after days of tension. The bed was soft. The sheets smelled of lavender. The room was warm. For a moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes without fear. But as she drifted off to sleep, a question hammered in her head. Who was this man, really? And what would he want from her when she had no way to leave? Beatrice woke up to golden sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of fresh coffee rising through the floorboards. For a few seconds, she didn't remember where she was, her brain still stuck between the nightmare of the last few weeks and the strangeness of that luxurious room. She sat up slowly, her heavy belly making movement difficult, and looked around with more attention than she had managed the night before. The room was larger than the entire living room of the house where she grew up. The walls had wallpaper with discreet floral patterns. The rosewood wardrobe had delicate carvings. The vanity had an oval mirror framed in bronze. On the bedside table, someone had left a pitcher of fresh water and a clear glass. Beatrice drank greedily, feeling her dry throat begin to find relief. Soft knocks on the door made her jump. "Come in," she said uncertainly. Lucille entered carrying a basin of steaming hot water and clean towels folded over her arm. "Good morning, miss," she greeted with a voice that tried to be cheerful but still carried suspicion. "Brought water for you to wash up. Then come to the kitchen for breakfast. Mr. Vance said you are to eat well today." Beatrice murmured a thank you as Lucille placed everything on the vanity and opened the green velvet curtains, letting in even more light. The housekeeper was a robust woman in her early 50s, grey hair in a tight bun, large calloused hands of someone who had worked since childhood. She had deep wrinkles around her eyes and mouth, but they weren't wrinkles from laughing much. They were wrinkles of worry, of responsibility, of carrying others' burdens. "There are clean clothes in the bottom drawer of the wardrobe," Lucille informed her, pointing. "Those belonged to Mrs. Helen, Mr. Vance's late wife. She kept a lot of dresses she didn't use anymore. They should fit you. You're about the same size, minus the belly, of course." Beatrice felt immediate discomfort. "I can't wear a dead woman's clothes," she protested. "It's not right." Lucille rolled her eyes with impatience. "Nonsense, girl. Clothes don't have souls, and those clothes have been sitting there for 6 years gathering moths. Better you use them than let them rot. Now wash up and get dressed. I'm waiting in the kitchen." And before Beatrice could argue further, the housekeeper left, closing the door with a firmness that left no room for discussion. Beatrice washed with the hot water using glycerin soap that smelled of roses. It was the first time in days she could clean herself properly. The sensation of dirt and sweat leaving her skin was almost as good as the hot broth had been the night before. She opened the wardrobe drawer and found piles of carefully folded clothes, cotton, linen, silk dresses, skirts and blouses, lace slips, all of a quality Beatrice had only seen in fine shop windows when she went to the big city. She chose the simplest one she found, a navy blue cotton dress with a white collar and long sleeves. It was a bit tight across the belly but fit reasonably well everywhere else. She combed her hair as best she could without a proper brush, pinned it in a low bun at the nape of her neck, and went down the wooden stairs that creaked softly under her bare feet. The main house was even more impressive in daylight. The downstairs hallway had wide, waxed floorboards that shone, paintings on the walls showing rural landscapes and portraits of stern people who must be ancestors. A tall grandfather clock that marked 9 in the morning with a solemn tick-tock. Beatrice followed the smell of coffee and fresh bread until she found the kitchen. It was enormous. A cast-iron wood stove with 6 burners, a soapstone sink, a large solid wood table in the center, shelves on the walls lined with copper pots, jars of dry goods, glass jars of preserves. Lucille was at the table cutting thick slices of coffee cake that was still warm. "Sit there," she ordered, pointing to a chair. Beatrice obeyed, feeling completely out of place. Lucille poured coffee with milk into an enamel mug, placed the cake on the table, along with biscuits and butter, fresh cheese, blackberry jam, scrambled eggs. Enough food to feed 4 people. "Eat," the housekeeper insisted, seeing Beatrice hesitate. "You're thin as a rail, and there's a child in there needing sustenance." Beatrice began to eat slowly, but her hunger was such that she was soon devouring everything with an appetite that surprised even her. "Mr. Vance already went out to check the fields," Lucille informed her while washing dishes in the sink. "But he said, when you woke up, I was to tell you that Dr. Silver is coming this afternoon to examine you." Beatrice stopped with her fork in the air. "I don't need a doctor," she protested. "I'm fine." Lucille gave a short laugh without humor. "Miss, you fainted from hunger and exhaustion on the road 7 months pregnant," she said dryly. "You are not fine. And Mr. Vance won't have any peace until a doctor examines you properly." Beatrice lowered her eyes to her plate, feeling shame burn her cheeks. The man's kindness was almost offensive. It was so unexpected. Lucille sighed and dried her hands on her apron. "Look here, miss," she started with a softer voice. "I don't know what happened to you, and it's none of my business. But Mr. Vance is a good man. He suffered a lot when he lost Mrs. Helen and the baby. He shut down, got hard, no life inside him. But last night when he brought you here, I saw something different in his eyes. Something that was dead woke up a little bit." Beatrice looked up, surprised. The housekeeper was looking out the window at the yard where chickens scratched at the red earth. "So you do this," Lucille continued. "Accept his help while you need it. Let him be generous. Let him feel useful again. And when you're able, you leave or stay, however you want. But don't throw his kindness back in his face with foolish pride. Pride doesn't feed a baby." The words hung in the kitchen air as Beatrice finished her coffee in silence. Lucille was right, and she knew it. But accepting help hurt in a way she couldn't explain. It hurt because it meant admitting she had failed, that she was alone, that she was dependent on the charity of strangers. And it hurt because deep down she was afraid of the price she would eventually have to pay. Dr. Silver arrived at 3 in the afternoon in a buggy pulled by a bay horse. He was a man of about 60, short and plump, with a trimmed white moustache and round, gold-rimmed glasses. Roderick received him at the entrance, and the two spoke in low voices before going up to the room where Beatrice waited tensely, sitting on the edge of the bed. The exam was quick and professional. The doctor listened to the baby's heartbeat with a wooden stethoscope, palpated her belly, checked her blood pressure, examined her swollen feet, asked questions about dates and symptoms. When he finished, he packed his instruments in his black bag and turned to Roderick, who had been waiting in the hallway. "The girl is malnourished and dehydrated," he diagnosed frankly. "But nothing that proper food and rest won't solve. The baby seems fine. The heartbeat is strong. She must be entering her 8th month now. She needs to gain weight, needs meat, milk, eggs, fruit, and she needs peace, Mr. Vance. A pregnant woman cannot be under excessive stress." Roderick nodded seriously. "She will have all of that here," he guaranteed. Beatrice heard the conversation from the room and felt the tears finally fall. She cried silently, face hidden in her hands, body shaking with stifled sobs. She cried for the relief of knowing the baby was okay. She cried for the incomprehensible kindness of that man. She cried for the family that had thrown her away. She cried for Julian, who had run away like a coward. She cried for herself and for the innocent creature who was going to be born without a father and without a clean name. Roderick returned to the room after the doctor left and found Beatrice still crying. He stood in the doorway, not knowing what to do, hands in his trouser pockets, discomfort evident in his rigid posture. "Don't cry," he asked awkwardly. "The doctor said you and the baby will be fine." Beatrice wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "It's not that," she said, voice choked. "It's just that I don't understand why you're doing all this. I'm nothing to you, just a stranger who appeared at the gate." Roderick entered the room and sat in the armchair, keeping a respectful distance. He stared at his own hands for a long moment before speaking. "My wife died in childbirth 6 years ago," he began in a low voice. "The baby died too, a girl. I stood outside that room listening to her scream and couldn't do anything. When it was over, when the screaming stopped too suddenly, I knew what had happened even before the doctor came out to tell me." Beatrice stopped crying and stared at him. Roderick continued talking, as if the words had been dammed up for years and finally found an outlet. "Since that day I just exist. I don't live. I work, I run the farm, I close deals, but it's all mechanical. This house turned into a cemetery where I'm the only ghost. And last night when I saw you fallen on the road, pregnant, alone, something inside me woke up. I thought maybe this was a chance to do something right, to save someone, since I couldn't save them." The silence that followed was heavy with shared pain. Beatrice realized that this man understood abandonment in a way no one else understood. He had also been abandoned only by death, not by cowardice. "My mother kicked me out of the house," Beatrice said slowly. "My fiancé ran away when he found out I was pregnant. Everyone in the village closed their door to me. My own aunt said I reaped what I sowed. I walked I don't know how many miles without knowing where to go until I fainted at your gate." Roderick finally looked at her. His eyes were grey-green, she noticed, and they held a sadness so deep it seemed bottomless. "What was his name?" Roderick asked. "Your fiancé?" "Julian," Beatrice answered with bitterness in her voice. "Julian Caesar Moore. We courted for 2 years. He promised marriage, said we could anticipate things, that God forgave when there was true love. I believed him. I was an idiot and believed him." "You weren't an idiot," Roderick corrected firmly. "You were betrayed by someone who didn't deserve your trust. That's not being an idiot, that's being deceived." "Those are different things." Beatrice felt something strange in her chest at that defense. No one had defended her since the pregnancy was discovered. Everyone had assumed she was the guilty one, the fallen one, the shameless one. Hearing someone place the blame where it truly belonged was like balm on an open wound. "I'll stay here just until I can manage," Beatrice promised. "I don't want to be a burden to you. As soon as the baby is born and I recover, I'll get a job, save money and leave the farm." Roderick shook his head. "You don't need to rush," he said, "and when you're ready to leave, if you want to leave, I'll help you find work. But right now, you need to worry about only one thing, getting healthy so the baby is born well." The days that followed created a strange but comforting routine. Beatrice woke early, ate the hearty breakfast Lucille insisted on serving, spent mornings reading books from the house library or helping with light tasks like folding laundry or shelling peas. Afternoons were mandatory rest. Roderick brought lunch to her room himself sometimes, keeping her company while she ate, talking about neutral subjects like the weather, the tobacco harvest, the chickens in the yard. But gradually, the conversations grew deeper. Roderick talked about his childhood on the farm, about the authoritarian father who had died when he was 20, leaving all responsibility on his eldest son's shoulders. He talked about meeting Helen at a ball in Richmond, how she was joyful and full of life, how the house had been different when she was alive. Beatrice talked about her simple childhood in the village, about her father, who had died of tuberculosis, about how she had learned to sew from her grandmother and dreamed of one day owning her own shop. It was the end of the second week when Arthur Vance appeared for the first time. Beatrice was sitting on the front porch, shelling peas into a basin, when she saw the elegant buggy coming up the driveway. The man who stepped down was handsome in an artificial way. Black hair slicked back with too much pomade, thin moustache trimmed with precision, city clothes too expensive for a farm visit. He had a wide smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Uncle Rod," he called out with a voice too loud. "Came to pay that visit I owed you." Roderick came out of the house, and Beatrice immediately noticed the change in his posture. His shoulders grew rigid, his expression closed off. "Arthur," he greeted without enthusiasm. "What a surprise!" The nephew climbed the porch steps and only then seemed to notice Beatrice. "And who is this young lady?" he asked with curiosity barely disguised as politeness. Roderick hesitated only a fraction of a second before answering. "Beatrice is a guest here," he said, in a voice that allowed no questions. Arthur raised his eyebrows, with an expression mixing surprise and something harder to identify. "A guest," he repeated slowly, letting the word float with insinuation. "How generous of you, uncle. And when did this hosting begin?" 2 weeks ago, Roderick answered dryly. "And it's none of your business, Arthur. Now, if you came here for something specific, speak up. If you just came for a courtesy call, I appreciate it, but I'm busy." The nephew kept the smile, but Beatrice saw anger flash quickly in his eyes before being hidden again. "I came to get that money you promised for some investments," Arthur said, turning his attention back to his uncle. "You remember we spoke last month?" "I don't remember promising any money," Roderick corrected, crossing his arms. "I remember you asking and me saying I'd think about it. The answer is no, Arthur. You already received a generous allowance this month. If you spent it all on nonsense, that's your problem." The awkwardness on the porch was palpable. Arthur finally lost the smile. "Uncle, I'm your only relative," he argued with a tense voice. "Your only heir. Don't you think I deserve a little more consideration?" "You'll inherit the estate when I die," Roderick said coldly. "But while I'm alive, I decide what to do with my money. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work." Arthur looked from Roderick to Beatrice and back to Roderick. The smile returned, but it was dangerous now. "Of course, uncle," he said in a honeyed voice. "Of course you decide. Sorry to bother you." And he went down the porch steps with strides too quick to appear calm. Beatrice watched the buggy go down the driveway, kicking up red dust. "He didn't like seeing me here," she observed quietly. Roderick sighed heavily and sat in one of the rocking chairs. "Arthur doesn't like anything that threatens the inheritance he's already spending in his head before I'm dead," he said wearily. "But don't worry about him. He barks a lot but doesn't bite." Except Roderick was wrong. Arthur bit, and he bit with venom. The following week, the gossip started. Mrs. Amelia, who owned the fabric store in St. Anthony's Creek, commented to Mrs. Mercer that she heard the widower of St. Helena's estate was shacked up with a young girl. Mrs. Mercer told her husband, who was friends with Father Andrew. The priest discreetly mentioned to some church ladies that he was worried about Mr. Vance's soul. And so the story spread like fire in dry grass. People who hadn't spoken Roderick's name in 6 years suddenly had an opinion on his life. They said it was indecent for a man of his age to have a young girl living in the house. They said the girl must be his mistress. They said she had tricked the poor lonely widower to steal his fortune. They said the baby was his and he had invented the guest story to hide the scandal. Roderick heard the rumors when he went into town to handle business at the bank. The manager, Mr. Oakley, mentioned too casually that he had heard some comments. Roderick replied that his private life was no one's business and left, slamming the door. But the anger burned inside. Not for himself. He was used to isolation and didn't care about others' opinions. But for Beatrice, who had already suffered enough judgment. When he returned to the farm, he found Beatrice in the dining room, helping Lucille set the table for lunch. She had gained weight in recent weeks. Her cheeks had color again. Her eyes no longer held that background of permanent despair. She was wearing a green linen dress that had been Helen's, and it looked beautiful on her, highlighting her brown eyes. "I need to talk to you after lunch," Roderick warned, taking off his hat. "It's important." Beatrice nodded, feeling anxiety tighten her stomach. They ate in tense silence. Roderick barely touched his food. When Lucille cleared the plates and retreated to the kitchen, he finally began to speak. "They're spreading rumors in town," he said directly, "about you living here. They say you're my mistress. They say the baby is mine. They say you're tricking me to steal money." Beatrice went pale. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew this would happen. I need to leave." Roderick slammed his hand on the table with force that made the silverware jump. "You are going nowhere," he said firmly. "Let them talk. They're going to talk anyway." "But you don't understand," argued Beatrice with tears in her eyes. "This will ruin your reputation. It will affect business. It will cause trouble with your family." Roderick stood up and walked around the table, standing beside her chair. "Look at me," he asked. Beatrice raised her eyes. "I don't care about reputation," he said slowly. "I don't care about gossip, and I don't care about family that only shows up when they want something. You stay here as long as you need, and if anyone has a problem with that, it's their problem, not ours." What a beautiful story, right? Comment down below what you're thinking so far. Do you think love will conquer all these obstacles? The determination in his voice was undeniable. But Beatrice also saw something else. She saw the way he looked at her lately, as if he were really seeing a person, and not just a pregnant girl who needed help. She saw how he looked for excuses to be close, how he brought flowers from the garden to her room, how he smiled when she made some witty observation. And most frightening of all, Beatrice realized she was starting to look at him the same way. It was wrong, she told herself every night, lying in the comfortable bed of the guest room. Wrong to get attached to him. Wrong to confuse gratitude with feeling. Wrong to think of him as a man when he was just her benefactor. Wrong to imagine what if things were different, if she weren't pregnant by another, if there wasn't a social abyss between them, if the world didn't judge every move they made. But the heart didn't understand right and wrong. And on afternoons when they sat together on the porch, when he read snippets of the newspaper aloud and she commented, when they laughed at some nonsense Lucille said, when their fingers accidentally touched passing the sugar bowl during coffee, Beatrice felt something growing inside her chest that wasn't gratitude. It was more dangerous. It was hope. Roderick also struggled with feelings he couldn't name. For 6 years he had felt nothing but emptiness. And suddenly the house had life again. It had the sound of Beatrice humming softly while she sewed. It had her laughter when Lucille told funny stories in the kitchen. It had the sight of her on the porch at sunset with the sun illuminating her loose hair. It had conversations that stretched into the night about dreams, fears, regrets. He caught himself thinking about her during the day while supervising work in the tobacco fields. Caught himself looking for her with his eyes as soon as he returned home. Caught himself inventing excuses to stay longer in the room where she was. And most frightening, caught himself imagining a future where she didn't leave when the baby was born, where she stayed, where that house went back to being a real home. But he always ran into reality. She was pregnant by another man. She was 20 years younger than him. She was only there because she had nowhere to go. Any feeling she showed was probably gratitude, not real attraction, and he had no right to take advantage of her vulnerability to satisfy his own loneliness. It was on an afternoon in September, when the mulberry trees in the yard were loaded with dark fruit and the air smelled sweet with coming spring, that everything changed. Beatrice was in the yard picking mulberries into a basket when she felt the first contraction. It wasn't strong, just an uncomfortable tightening in her belly that lasted a few seconds and passed. She continued picking, but 10 minutes later came another, and another 15 minutes later. The baby wasn't due yet. There were 3 weeks left to complete the 9 months, but bodies don't follow calendars. She dropped the basket and walked slowly back to the house, holding her belly. "Lucille," she called from the kitchen door. "Lucille, I think it's starting." The housekeeper dropped the bread dough she was kneading and wiped her hands on her apron. "Having a contraction?" she asked practically. Beatrice nodded. "How many so far?" "3, answered Beatrice, feeling another start as she spoke. Lucille helped her sit in a chair. "I'll send Walter to get the doctor," she decided, "and I'll warn Mr. Vance. You stay sitting here, breathe deep, don't strain." Roderick was in the barn checking coffee sacks, no, tobacco bales, for export when Lucille arrived running. "You need to come, sir," she warned breathlessly. "Beatrice is going into labor." Roderick felt the ground vanish beneath him. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale as paper. "Already?" he asked with a strangled voice. "But she still has 3 weeks." Lucille grabbed his arm tightly. "Baby comes when it wants to come," she said firmly. "I already sent for the doctor." "But you need to come now. She's scared." Roderick practically ran to the house. He found Beatrice in the kitchen, breathing heavily, hands gripping the edge of the table, face contorted with pain. When the contraction passed, she raised her eyes, and he saw pure fear there. "What if something goes wrong?" she whispered. "What if I die like your wife? What if the baby dies?" Roderick knelt in front of her and held her hands in his. "Nothing will go wrong," he promised, with a conviction he didn't know where he found. "The doctor is on his way. Lucille has helped dozens of babies be born, and I will be here the whole time. You are not alone, Beatrice. You are not alone anymore." She squeezed his hands tightly when another contraction came, and for the first time in 6 years, Roderick didn't run from someone else's pain. He stayed there, holding, supporting, present. Dr. Silver arrived an hour later. Labor was progressing too fast. "Let's get her to the room," he instructed. "And Mr. Vance, I'll need boiling water, clean towels, and sterilized scissors." Lucille was already providing everything when the doctor spoke. Roderick helped Beatrice up the stairs, each step an eternity of effort and pain. They laid her on the guest room bed. The doctor examined her and announced that dilation was advanced. "Baby's coming soon," he said. "Another 2 hours at most." But Beatrice screamed when a contraction too strong tore through her like lightning. Roderick held her hand, and she squeezed with force that must have been hurting, but he didn't care. The hours that followed were the longest of Roderick's life. Every scream from Beatrice was a dagger in his chest. Every moment the doctor frowned was a new terror. Memories of the night Helen died returned in painful flashes. The smell of blood, the screams that had stopped too suddenly. The terrible silence that had followed, but this time was different. This time he wasn't outside, powerless. He was inside, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her forehead, whispering words of encouragement. The doctor needed help at a certain point, and Roderick didn't hesitate. He did what he was told, even with trembling hands, even with paralyzing fear threatening to take over. And when finally the cry of a baby filled the room, loud and strong and full of life, Roderick felt something inside his chest he hadn't felt in 6 years. He felt joy. Pure, simple, overwhelming joy. "It's a girl," announced the doctor, smiling for the first time. "Healthy and strong. Congratulations, miss. You were very brave." Beatrice was exhausted, soaked in sweat, trembling with fatigue. But when Lucille placed the baby wrapped in a blanket in her arms, her eyes filled with tears of happiness. "It's a girl," she repeated in wonder, looking at the tiny red and wrinkled face. "A little girl." She looked at Roderick, who was still beside the bed, holding her hand. "Thank you," she said with a hoarse voice. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for everything." Roderick couldn't answer. Emotion was blocking his throat. He just nodded and squeezed her hand one more time before leaving the room to give them privacy while the doctor finished procedures. He went down to the front porch and sat on the steps. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Cicadas sang loudly in the trees. The world kept turning, but something fundamental had changed. He had helped bring a life into the world. He had been present. He had been useful. And more than that, he had felt something he swore he would never be able to feel again. He had felt love. Not the calm and mature love he had for Helen. It was something different, more urgent, more frightening. It was the love of someone who had been rescued just as much as he had rescued. But along with love came guilt. Beatrice had just given birth to another man's daughter. She was vulnerable, grateful, dependent on him. It would be monstrous to take advantage of this moment to confess feelings. It would be wrong to pressure her when she had barely begun to recover from childbirth. It would be selfishness to think of himself when she needed peace to care for the baby. So Roderick made the decision to keep everything inside his chest. He would keep helping, keep being a friend, keep offering protection and support, but he wouldn't say anything about what he felt. Not until he was absolutely sure that any feeling she might have was real, not disguised gratitude, not until the abyss between them could be crossed with dignity on both sides intact. Inside, Beatrice held her daughter and thought about the words Roderick had said. "You are not alone. You are not alone anymore." And for the first time since her mother had slammed the door in her face, Beatrice believed maybe that was true. Maybe she wasn't alone. Maybe she had found not just shelter, but something much more precious. Maybe she had found family, and maybe, just maybe, she had found love too. But that thought was too dangerous to entertain. So she pushed it to the back of her mind and concentrated on the perfect little creature nestled in her arms. "I'll call you Claire," she whispered, kissing the soft forehead. "Claire, my light, my hope, my reason to keep fighting." Mace, what neither of them knew was that the real fights were still to come, because Arthur hadn't given up, and Julian was about to reappear, and society didn't forgive easily, and true love, when it finally bloomed between them, would have to be strong enough to survive storms that hadn't even begun. The first days with Claire were a mix of enchantment and exhaustion Beatrice had never experienced before. The baby was tiny, barely weighing 6 pounds, but had powerful lungs that woke the whole house in the cold dawn of September. Beatrice learned to nurse with Lucille's patient help, learned to change cloth diapers, learned to recognize each type of cry and what each one meant. Roderick was a constant and surprising presence. He appeared in the room several times a day, bringing hot tea, peeled fruit, a shawl when the wind blew colder through the window. He stayed there sitting in the armchair just watching, and sometimes held Claire with the reverent care of someone holding something extremely fragile and precious. The first time the baby grabbed his finger with her tiny hand, Beatrice saw tears in the man's eyes that he tried to hide by turning his face away. He would have been a wonderful father, Beatrice thought, watching the scene. "And he still could be," whispered a treacherous voice inside her head. But she pushed the thought away. It was too dangerous to let hopes grow. Roderick was being kind because he was a good man, nothing more than that. She needed to remember that always, needed to protect herself from creating fantasies that would only bring more pain when they inevitably crumbled. 3 weeks after the birth, Beatrice was recovered enough to come down and take meals at the table with Roderick and Lucille. The housekeeper had transformed completely since Claire was born. The initial suspicion had given way to a fierce maternal affection. She competed with Beatrice for who would hold the baby, knitted tiny blankets and clothes, sang lullabies with a raspy but affectionate voice. It was on one of those afternoons, when Claire slept in the improvised cradle Roderick had ordered from the farm carpenter, that Beatrice finally had the courage to touch on a subject she had avoided for weeks. "I need to think about work," she said while they had coffee on the porch. "I can't stay here on charity forever. I need to manage to support my daughter." Roderick placed his cup on the saucer too slowly, a controlled gesture indicating tension. "You aren't here on charity," he corrected with a careful voice, "and you don't need to rush. But if you want to work, I have a proposal." Beatrice raised her eyes, curious and cautious at the same time. He continued, "The farm's accounting is a mess. My old accountant died last year, and his nephew who took over isn't reliable. You showed you have a good head for numbers when we talked about production costs last week. How about you take care of the account books here at the estate? Fair pay, flexible hours because of the baby." Beatrice stared at him, looking for the catch, the hidden condition, the real price she would have to pay. But all she saw was sincerity and something else that made her heart race dangerously. "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked in a low voice. "Keep helping me. Keep creating opportunities. Why do you care so much?" Roderick held her gaze without wavering. "Because you deserve it," he answered simply. "Because you are intelligent and strong, and because I like having you here." The last sentence hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither had the courage to name. Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I accept," she said finally. "I accept taking care of the accounting, but on one condition." Roderick raised his eyebrows. "Which is?" "That it be real work, not disguised charity," Beatrice answered firmly. "If I do something wrong, you correct me. If I can't handle it, you fire me. I don't want to be treated differently because I'm a single mother who needs protection." Roderick extended a formal hand, sealing the deal. "Agreed," he said. And that was how Beatrice began officially working at St. Helena's estate. Every morning, after nursing and leaving Claire in Lucille's care for a few hours, she went down to the office on the ground floor of the manor. It was a large room with shelves full of books, a large mahogany desk covered in papers, the smell of old leather and ink. The ledgers were truly a mess. Numbers didn't add up, entries without receipts, expenses noted confusingly. Beatrice dove into the work with dedication that surprised even herself. She discovered she had a natural aptitude for organizing information, finding patterns, doing complex math. Roderick was impressed when she pointed out discrepancies, suggested more efficient ways to record transactions, asked sharp questions about production costs. They spent hours in that office working side by side. Roderick explained details of the tobacco business, planting and harvest cycles, export markets, price fluctuations. Beatrice absorbed everything like a sponge. And in the middle of work, there were moments their hands touched, reaching for the same document. Moments their eyes met and held contact a second longer than necessary. Moments the air in the office became charged with tension that had nothing to do with numbers or business. It was during one of these work sessions in early October that Beatrice found the first serious irregularity. She was reviewing books from 3 years ago when she noticed a strange entry. Monthly withdrawals of considerable amounts, always on the same date, always with a signature claiming to be Roderick's, but looking forged. "Mr. Vance," she called, frowning. "Do you remember authorizing regular withdrawals of $500 a month between 1935 and 1937? Roderick approached and looked at the record she pointed to. "I never authorized that," he said slowly. "Where did these entries come from?" Beatrice turned a few pages showing more similar entries. "It's here, here, here," she pointed. "Always on the 10th of the month, always the same amount, always with this signature that looks like yours, but has subtle differences." Roderick sat heavily in his chair, feeling anger start to boil. "That adds up to almost $20,000, Beatrice calculated quickly. That's enough money to buy a small farm. Who had access to the books back then? She asked. Roderick closed his eyes and sighed. Arthur, he answered bitterly. My nephew helped with the paperwork after the old accountant died. I trusted him, let him handle small things while I busied myself with operations. That wretch has been robbing me for years. Beatrice continued investigating and found more irregularities, duplicate payments to ghost suppliers, inflated expenses for maintenance that was never done, falsified invoices. Arthur had set up an elaborate embezzlement scheme that had only gone undiscovered because Roderick was too deep in depression to pay attention to financial details. This needs to be reported, said Beatrice seriously. It's a crime. He stole a fortune. Roderick shook his head slowly, processing the betrayal. Arthur was his brother John Paul's son, who had died young in a horse accident. Roderick had assumed responsibility for the nephew, paid for expensive education, given a generous allowance, promised he would inherit the estate. And as thanks, he had been systematically robbed for years. The anger gave way to cold, calculated determination. Let's gather all the evidence first, he decided. Every page of the books where there's an irregularity, every fake invoice, everything. Let's organize a complete dossier, and then we confront him, with a lawyer and the sheriff present. I want him to pay for what he did. Beatrice nodded and dove into the task of cataloguing every fraud, every forgery, every stolen cent. She worked whole days on the project, Claire sleeping in the cradle beside the desk, Lucille bringing food so she wouldn't forget to eat. It was during this intense period of work that something definitively changed between Beatrice and Roderick. The long hours together in the office, the complicity of working as a team, the mutual admiration growing every day. Roderick saw Beatrice no longer as a vulnerable girl needing protection, but as an intelligent, capable woman who was literally saving his patrimony. Beatrice saw Roderick no longer just as a generous benefactor, but as a man of integrity who valued justice and truth above misplaced family loyalty. One night, working late because Claire had finally slept after fretful hours, Beatrice looked up from the papers and found Roderick watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "Is there something on my face?" she asked, touching her cheek awkwardly. Roderick blinked, as if waking from a trance. "Sorry," he said hoarsely. "I was just thinking how extraordinary you are, how lucky I was that you fainted at my gate that night." Beatrice felt emotion tighten her throat. "I'm the one who got lucky," she answered softly. "If you hadn't found me, Claire and I would probably be dead now." Roderick got up from his chair and walked around the desk, getting closer. "Stop calling me Mr. Vance," he asked. "My name is Roderick." Beatrice swallowed hard. His proximity was doing strange things to her breathing. "Roderick," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. He smiled, and it was the first time she saw a genuine smile on his face. The moment was interrupted by firm knocks on the front door. Who could it be at that hour of the night, almost 10 o'clock? Roderick went to answer while Beatrice tidied the papers on the desk. She heard male voices coming from the entrance hall, one of them too familiar, making the blood freeze in her veins. It couldn't be, but it was. Julian Caesar Moore stood in the living room doorway with his hat in hand and an expression of false humility on his face. When he saw Beatrice, his eyes widened. "Beatrice," he called, taking a step forward. "Beatrice, thank God I found you. I was looking for you everywhere." She stood up from the chair with wobbly legs, anger and fear fighting inside her chest. "What are you doing here?" she asked, with a voice she hoped sounded firmer. Julian looked from Beatrice to Roderick and back to Beatrice. "I came to get you and my daughter," he declared. "I know I made a terrible mistake. I was a coward, a runner, didn't deserve you. But I repented, Beatrice, repented every day since I left. I want to do things right now, want to marry you, claim the child, give her my name." Beatrice let out a laugh with no humor. Now you want to marry, she said incredulously, after abandoning me pregnant, after running away, after my whole family kicked me out because of you. Julian took another step, trying to look sincere. I know I did a horrible thing, but I was young, scared, wasn't ready. Now I'm different. Now I'm ready to be a father, to be a husband. Give me a chance, Beatrice, for the love we had. Roderick, who'd been watching in silence until then, finally spoke. I think you better leave my house, he said with a dangerously calm voice. The lady made it very clear she wants nothing to do with you. Julian turned to Roderick with an expression trying to be respectful, but holding poorly hidden contempt. With all due respect, sir, this is a matter between me and my fiancée. Beatrice isn't your fiancée, Roderick corrected, taking a step forward. Never was. You ran, abandoned her, left her to die on the road. Now she is under my protection, and you won't get near her or the baby. Julian narrowed his eyes. Ah, I get it now, he said with a voice full of poisonous insinuation. I abandon her, and you take advantage of the situation. How convenient. The tension in the room became explosive. Roderick advanced, but Beatrice put herself between the two men. Stop, she said firmly, looking at Roderick. He's not worth it. And to Julian, get out of here now and never come back. I don't want you. I don't want your name. I don't want anything that comes from you. My daughter doesn't need a coward father who only shows up when it's convenient. Julian tried one more time. Beatrice, think carefully. You're going to stay here on charity, living off handouts with a bastard baby. Come back with me. We marry. Nobody says anything else. I have a good job now in Richmond. I can support you both. The word bastard was too much. Roderick grabbed Julian by the collar and practically dragged him to the door. Get out, he ordered with a voice admitting no argument. And if you come back here, if you get near her or the child, I will break you in half. Understood? Julian shook off the grip, adjusting his clothes with indignation. This won't stay like this, he threatened. I have rights. I'm the child's father. I can go to court. Roderick gave a dry laugh. Go, he said. Go to court and tell them how you abandoned a pregnant woman, how you ran from responsibility, how you only came back now after finding out she's living with a wealthy man. See how the judge reacts. Julian left, slamming the door, but the look he cast was pure threat. When they were alone, Beatrice crumbled. Her legs gave way, and she would have fallen if Roderick hadn't caught her. He helped her sit on the sofa and knelt in front of her, holding her hands in his. I won't let him get near you, he promised fiercely. I won't let him take Claire. You're safe here, I swear you are. Beatrice looked at his face so close to hers and felt something break inside her chest. I'm in love with you, she said before she could stop herself. The words came out in a desperate whisper. I know I shouldn't be. I know it's wrong, that you're just being kind, that I'm confusing gratitude with something else. But I can't pretend anymore. I love you, Roderick. I truly love you. The silence that followed was torturous. Roderick froze, looking at her with an expression Beatrice couldn't decipher. Then he pulled her into a hug so tight it almost hurt. Thank God, he murmured into her hair. Thank God. I thought it was just me. Thought I was alone in this. Thought you'd never see me as anything but an old man who helped you. Beatrice pulled back just enough to look at his face. You love me, she asked, barely believing. Roderick held her face between his hands with infinite delicacy. I've loved you since that night when you woke up scared, and I promised you were safe, he confessed. I love you more every day that passes. Love your way of frowning when you're concentrating. Love how you sing to Claire. Love your intelligence, your strength, your courage. Love how you turned this dead house into a home again. And he kissed her, finally, after weeks of accumulated tension. It was a gentle kiss, almost reverent, loaded with emotion neither knew how to express in words. When they separated, Beatrice was crying. But I have a baby by another man, she said between sobs. I have nothing to offer you. You deserve someone better, someone without a complicated past, someone of the same social class. Roderick wiped her tears with his thumbs. "I don't want anyone better," he said firmly. "I want you, exactly as you are. With Claire, with your past, with everything. You aren't a burden, Beatrice. You are a gift I didn't know I needed." They stayed there, hugged on the sofa, until Claire started crying upstairs, demanding a late-night feeding. Reality returned gradually, but couldn't diminish the happiness shining in their eyes. They went up together, Roderick waiting in the hall while Beatrice nursed. When she finished, he entered the room and watched mother and daughter with an expression of absolute contentment. But their happiness was about to be brutally tested. Because 3 days later, Arthur appeared at the farm with a lawyer and documents claiming Roderick was mentally incapacitated to manage the business. They arrived early in the morning when Beatrice was bathing Claire in a basin in the kitchen. Lucille came running to warn there were visitors, and it looked like serious trouble. Roderick received his nephew and Mr. Augustus Murray, an expensive lawyer from Richmond, in the sitting room. Arthur had a triumphant smile barely disguised. "Uncle," he began with fake concern, "I came because I'm worried about you. You aren't right in the head lately, making strange decisions, letting an unknown woman live in your house, confusing reality with fantasy. I think you need medical help." The lawyer opened a leather briefcase and took out documents. "Mr. Vance," he said with a professional and cold voice, "we have been informed of erratic behavior on your part, housing a pregnant woman with no family ties, spending farm resources on her and a child that isn't yours, making questionable financial decisions. Your nephew is concerned that you no longer have the capacity to manage such significant assets. We are here to propose that he assume temporary administration while you recover." Roderick felt anger boil, but kept his voice calm. "There is nothing wrong with my head," he said slowly, "and I suggest you two leave my property before I call the sheriff." Arthur stood up dramatically. "See, Counselor," he said, pointing to his uncle, "aggression without motive, paranoia, clear signs of mental deterioration." The lawyer made notes in a notebook as if collecting evidence. That was when Beatrice entered the room carrying a thick folder under her arm. "Excuse me," she said, polite but firm, "but I think there are some things the lawyer needs to see before continuing with this farce." Arthur went pale when he saw the folder. "What do you have there?" he asked with a tense voice. Beatrice opened the folder on the coffee table and began spreading organized documents. "Proof that Mr. Arthur Vance embezzled more than $20,000 from the estate in the last 3 years, she said clearly. "Here are the account books with falsified entries, the forged signatures, the invoices from suppliers that don't exist, duplicate payments, all documented, all dated, all proving he set up an elaborate theft scheme." The lawyer leaned in to look at the documents, and his expression changed drastically. Arthur tried to laugh. "This is ridiculous," he said with a voice too high. "She forged all this. She's the one tricking my uncle to steal the farm." Roderick stood up and went face to face with his nephew. "Beatrice discovered what you've been doing for years," he said with a dangerously low voice. "She saved this farm from you, and now you have 2 options. You return every cent you stole and disappear from my life forever, or I prosecute you criminally and you go to prison. Choose." The lawyer closed his briefcase hurriedly. "Mr. Vance," he said to Arthur, "if these documents are authentic, and they appear to be, you are in serious legal trouble. I cannot represent you in this situation. As for the allegation of your uncle's mental incapacity, clearly it has no foundation." Arthur was cornered and knew it. He looked from Roderick to Beatrice with pure hate. "This won't end here," he spat. "You will regret this." "Get out of my house," Roderick ordered. "And never come back. If I see you near here again, I hand you to the police without thinking twice." Arthur left, followed by the embarrassed lawyer, but at the door he turned one last time. "The whole town knows you two are living in sin," he said venomously. "Knows she's your mistress. knows you're making a fool of yourself with a tramp 20 years younger. And now, with these accusations, everyone will talk even more. Roderick advanced, but Beatrice held his arm. "Let it be," she said softly. "He already lost. Don't let him have the satisfaction of seeing you lose control." Arthur laughed humorlessly and left. The silence remaining was heavy with implications. His words had hit where it hurt. The age difference, the ambiguous situation, society's judgment, everything they had avoided talking about. Roderick turned to Beatrice. "He's right about one thing," he said tiredly. "The whole town is talking. You living here, me supporting you, us having no official tie, it looks exactly like what it isn't." Beatrice felt her heart tighten. "I understand," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You want me to leave to protect your reputation. Is that it?" Roderick stared at her as if she had said something absurd. "No, Beatrice," he said, taking her hands. "That's not it. What I want is to do things right. I want you to marry me. I want to adopt Claire legally. I want you to be my wife for real, not a guest, not an employee, not a mistress. I want to wake up every day with you beside me for the rest of my life." Beatrice stared at him with wide eyes. "But the town will talk even more," she protested. "They'll say you're marrying a fallen woman, say I'm a gold digger, say horrible things. Comment down below if you think they should face everything and stay together." "Let them talk," Roderick said with absolute conviction. "Let the whole town talk. I don't care. I want you, Beatrice. I want you as my wife, as my partner, as the love of my life. The age difference doesn't matter. Your past doesn't matter. What matters is that I love you, and you love me, and we can be happy together if you accept." Then he knelt right there in the middle of the living room, held her hands, and asked formally, "Beatrice Miller, do you accept to marry me?" Tears ran freely down her face now. But before answering, she needed to be absolutely sure. "You aren't doing this because you feel sorry for me?" she asked with a broken voice. "Not doing it out of obligation, gratitude, because I discovered your nephew's theft? You really love me, Roderick? Love me for real, not because I need you?" Roderick stood up and held her face between his hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. "I love you because you light up my day," he said intensely. "Because you make me laugh again. Because you are intelligent and brave and beautiful. Because when I look at you, my heart beats faster. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it. It's not pity, it's not obligation, it's not gratitude. It's love, Beatrice, real love, the kind I thought I'd never feel again after Helen died." Beatrice closed her eyes, letting the words penetrate, and finally allowed herself to believe. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I accept to marry you." Roderick pulled her for a kiss more passionate this time, a kiss that sealed promise and future. Lucille, who had heard everything from the kitchen, let out a scream of joy and came running with Claire in her arms. The baby started crying, startled by the noise, and everyone laughed. But the battle wasn't over, because the next day Julian returned. This time he brought 2 men who introduced themselves as sheriff's deputies. They had a court order giving him the right to see his daughter. The judge had accepted a request for recognition of paternity and granted supervised visits. Beatrice felt the world collapse when she read the document. "He can't take my daughter," she said desperately to Roderick. "He abandoned us. He has no right." Roderick read the document carefully and then looked at Julian with contempt. "The warrant says supervised visit here on the property," he observed. "You can see the child for 1 hour, with the mother present, without taking her from here." Julian smiled victoriously. "For now," he said, "but soon I'll ask for shared custody. I'll prove the mother has no means to raise her alone." The visit was torture. Julian took Claire in his arms, and the baby cried immediately, sensing the stranger. He tried to calm her, but didn't know how, became clumsy and irritated. Beatrice had to take the baby back after 15 minutes because Claire was inconsolable. Julian became frustrated. "She only cries because you're spoiling her," he accused. "A child needs a firm father, not a weak mother who gives in to everything." Roderick, who had been watching from the doorway, intervened. "The visit is over," he said firmly. "You saw the child. Now get out." Julian put on his hat, slowly making a point to show he had a right to be there. "I'll be back next week," he warned, "and every week after that, until I manage to take my daughter with me." When he left, Beatrice collapsed in tears, holding Claire tightly. "He's going to try to take her from me," she sobbed. "He's going to succeed, and I'm going to lose my daughter." Roderick hugged her strong. "He won't," he promised. "We're going to fight. We'll marry quickly. I'll adopt Claire. We'll show the judge she has a stable family here. Julian won't win, Beatrice." "I won't let him." They married a week later in a simple ceremony in the estate chapel, just Lucille and Dr. Silver as witnesses. Beatrice wore a simple white cotton dress. Roderick was in a dark suit. Father Andrew, who had initially refused to perform the ceremony due to rumors, finally gave in when Roderick donated a generous sum for church renovations. The vows were short but intense. Roderick promised to love and protect Beatrice and Claire for the rest of his life. Beatrice promised to be a faithful companion through any storm. When the priest pronounced husband and wife, the kiss they exchanged was of relief, love and determination to face together whatever came. The reception was on the main house porch, with a simple cake Lucille had made and champagne Roderick had saved for years. But the happiness of the marriage was short-lived. 3 days later, Julian returned with a lawyer and a new lawsuit. This time, he alleged Roderick had used influence and money to force a rushed marriage, that Beatrice had been coerced, that the whole situation was a farce to prevent paternal rights. The judge set a hearing for 2 weeks later, where everyone would have to present their versions. Beatrice spent those 2 weeks in agony, slept poorly, ate less, lived in a constant state of anxiety. Roderick tried to comfort her, but he himself was worried. Julian had hired a competent lawyer who was building a case based on class difference, the speed of the marriage, the ambiguous situation that preceded it. On the day of the hearing, the county courthouse was packed with curious folks who had gone to watch the scandal. The judge, Honorable Henry Sampson, was a man of about 60, known for conservative decisions. He heard first from Julian's lawyer, who painted a picture of a poor woman seducing a rich man, of a baby being used as a bargaining chip, of a legitimate father being pushed away from his daughter by financial interests. Then he heard the lawyer hired by Roderick, who presented documentation of Julian's abandonment, Beatrice's attempts to get help without success, the providential rescue by Roderick. But the decisive moment came when the judge asked Beatrice to testify. She went up to the stand, trembling, Claire in her arms, because the baby wouldn't stop crying if away from her mother. The judge asked direct questions. "Did you marry Mr. Vance for love or for convenience?" Beatrice took a deep breath and decided to speak the absolute truth. "I married for love," she said with a clear voice, "but I won't lie and say the situation didn't influence it. When I arrived at Roderick's farm, I was destroyed. My family had abandoned me, my baby's father had run away, I had no food, shelter, hope. Roderick saved me not just physically but emotionally. He treated me with dignity when no one else would, gave me work when I wanted to earn my keep, respected me when I was vulnerable." The judge watched her attentively. "Go on," he asked. Beatrice looked at Roderick, who was sitting behind the lawyer's table. "I fell in love with him gradually," she recounted. "It wasn't sudden, wasn't for money. It was because he is a good man, because he made me feel human again, because when I look at him, I see a future, not just the present. And yes, the situation with Julian hastened the marriage. But even without that threat, I would have married Roderick eventually, because I truly love him. The judge turned to Julian. And you, sir, why did you abandon this woman when she was pregnant? Julian tried to explain. I was young, scared, wasn't ready. The judge interrupted him. You were 26, you were an adult, you made a promise of marriage, had intimate relations with her based on that promise, and when you faced consequences, you ran, and now you return because she found a better situation. That isn't the behavior of a father. It's the behavior of an opportunist. The ruling came a week later. The judge denied Julian's request for regular visits, citing premeditated abandonment and attempt to exploit the situation. He granted Roderick the right to initiate adoption proceedings for Claire, and most importantly, validated the marriage as legitimate and based on true mutual affection. Julian left the courthouse defeated and never appeared in their lives again. News of the ruling spread fast through town. The gossip changed tone. Some people began to see the story not as a scandal, but as a fairy tale. The poor girl rescued by the millionaire. The lonely widower who found love again. The baby who gained a father even without blood ties. Others continued judging, of course. There would always be those who judged. But Roderick and Beatrice didn't care anymore. They had each other. They had Claire. They had the thriving estate. Arthur had returned part of the stolen money and fled to Richmond in shame. The accounting was organized and efficient under Beatrice's management. The main house, that had been a mausoleum of dead memories, had returned to being a home full of life. 6 months after the wedding, on a warm afternoon in March when the first spring rains began to fall, Roderick found Beatrice on the porch rocking Claire, who had just turned 1. He sat beside her, and they watched the rain in comfortable silence. "Are you happy?" he asked suddenly. Beatrice turned to look at her husband. "Happier than I imagined possible after everything I went through," she answered sincerely. "You gave me not just shelter, Roderick. You gave me dignity back, gave me purpose, gave me love I thought I'd never deserve to have. So yes, I am very happy." Roderick took her free hand and interlaced their fingers. "And I am happy because you brought color back to my life," he said softly. "Brought laughter, brought hope, brought a future. This house was dead before you. Now it's alive again." Claire chose that moment to take her first steps. She had been standing, holding onto the rocking chair, and suddenly let go, took 3 wobbly little steps, and fell, sitting into Roderick's lap. The 2 adults exploded in celebration. Claire laughed loud, proud of the feat. Roderick lifted the girl in the air, making her squeal with joy. "My smart little girl," he said with true fatherly pride. "My little princess." "Die." Beatrice watched the scene with an overflowing heart. This was family, not the one she was born into that had rejected her, not the one she had tried to build with Julian based on lies, but a real family, chosen, built on love and mutual respect. Claire didn't have Roderick's blood, but had his heart completely, and Roderick had no legal obligation to Claire until the adoption was finalized, but was already her father in every sense that mattered. The following years brought prosperity to St. Helena's estate. Beatrice expanded operations, starting to export tobacco directly to Europe, eliminating middlemen and increasing profits significantly. Roderick built a school on the property for workers' children, a project Beatrice had suggested and he had embraced with enthusiasm. Their reputation in the region changed from scandal to a model of an entrepreneurial and generous couple. Claire grew up loved and happy, calling Roderick Daddy, without ever knowing he wasn't her biological father. When she turned 5, she gained a brother. Beatrice got pregnant, and this time the pregnancy was completely different. It was celebrated, awaited, lived with pure joy. The boy was born in April of 1942, strong and loud, and received the name John Paul in honor of Roderick's late brother. The family was complete. One night in June of that year, when John Paul was 2 months old, and Claire was sleeping in the next room, Roderick and Beatrice were lying in the marital bed talking softly in the dark. "Do you regret anything?" Beatrice asked suddenly. Roderick turned on his side to look at her. "Regret what?" he asked, confused. "Taking me in that night," specified Beatrice. "All the problems I brought, the gossip, the judgment, the fight with Arthur, the lawsuit with Julian. Sometimes I think your life would be simpler if you had left me there on the road." Roderick pulled her closer. "My life would be empty if I had left you on the road," he corrected. "It would be quiet, organized, without complications, and completely meaningless. You appeared when I needed it most, even without knowing I needed it," he continued. "Gave me a reason to wake up in the morning that wasn't just work. Gave me a family again. Gave me love I swore had died with Helen. No, Beatrice, I don't regret anything. I only regret not finding you sooner." Beatrice felt tears wet the pillow. "I love you," she whispered. "Love you so much it scares me sometimes." Roderick kissed her forehead. "I love you too, and I will love you until the last day of my life." They slept embraced while outside the rain kept falling softly, watering the tobacco fields stretching to the horizon, guaranteeing a good harvest, promising a prosperous future. St. Helena's estate was no longer a house of ghosts and dead memories. It was a vibrant home full of children, laughter, dreams being built brick by brick, and it all started with 4 simple words spoken on a cold November night by a lonely man to a desperate girl. "You can stay here." Words that had changed 2 lives forever. Words that had built a family where there was only loneliness. Words that had proved true love follows no rules of social class, age, or circumstance. True love simply happens when 2 wounded hearts find healing in each other. Years later, when Beatrice was already a respected lady of the region and Roderick had completely white hair, they sat on the same porch where they had exchanged their first words of love, and told the story to their grandchildren. Told about the night Grandma fainted at the gate and Grandpa carried her inside, about the challenges they faced, about the love that conquered every obstacle. And the children listened in wonder, learning an important lesson, that dignity doesn't come from where you were born or how much money you have. It comes from how you treat other human beings, and that the best love stories aren't the ones that start easy. They are the ones won with courage, kept with effort, and celebrated every day because both people know exactly how much it cost to get there. Beatrice lived to 87, lucid and active to the end. Roderick died at 92, sleeping peacefully in the bed he had shared with her for decades. Claire became a doctor and continued the tradition of generosity, opening a free clinic in the village. John Paul managed the farm with the same integrity he learned from his parents, and their story became a legend in the region, told and retold as proof that miracles happen when kindness meets need and love blooms.